Can I come to you, Ayman, first, because before I go to the Prime Minister, because you've just come back from Washington, so I think it's very important to get the perspective from your position. The US has been Israel's staunchest ally. It remains Israel's staunchest ally, and it had been steadfast in its support of Israel's right to defend itself. But there is a change in tone from Washington, which belies a skepticism and frustration in the way that Israel is conducting its operation. You are just back from Washington, where Arab ministers met with the US Secretary of State on the same day that the US blocked a UN resolution demanding an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. What is your assessment of the current situation on the ground? And given your discussions with Antony Blinken, how would you describe the appetite in Washington for ending this conflict and the pressure that the US is prepared to bring to bear to make that happen?
Good morning, Becky. Thank you so much. And let me start by thanking our gracious hosts for putting together this forum at a very, very critical moment in our region. The war, unfortunately, continues. The victims are increasing by the day. What we see in Gaza is not simply the killing of innocent people, the destruction of their livelihoods, but we are seeing a systematic effort, it seems, to empty Gaza from its people. We've seen the amount of destruction in the north, and some of the thuggery that we see taking place there is just indicative of an Israeli policy that seems determined on pushing Gazans out of Gaza, and that is also playing to what has been a systematic policy adopted and advocated by members of Israeli government, from the Ben-Gvirs of Smotrich of this world to others who've been publicly, openly saying they want to wipe Palestinians out of the face of the earth. So I think as this war continues, it's revealing more and more an objective by Israel that goes beyond its declared objective of quote-unquote getting rid of Hamas into creating a new reality on the ground, a reality that is going to doom the future for more hatred and more conflict in this part of the world. Now, our efforts have not stopped to try and explain the danger inherent in the continuation of this aggression. We have not seen the world yet come to the place where it should come, which should be an unequivocal demand for ending this war, a war that is within the realm of the legal definition of genocide at this point. That has not happened. We're extremely disappointed that the UN resolution, which was simply calling for a humanitarian pause, that was vetoed. In the United States, we had a very blunt conversation with Secretary Blinken. All of us, the Arab and Muslim delegation, were very clear. Our priorities are set. Stop the aggression, allow sufficient humanitarian supplies into all parts of Gaza, ensure protection of civilians, and then we have to remember that this conflict was not born on October 7, that there's a historical context that needs to be addressed if the people of the region, Israelis and Palestinians, are to live in peace. Obviously, some of the positions the US has taken in terms of speaking out against the displacement, in terms of speaking out against Israel taking any parts of Gaza, in terms of allowing sufficient supplies in, our positions, we believe, are important. However, we have a major disagreement on the need to stop those atrocities. We're going to continue to engage, but I think the point I want to really emphasize is that it's not. Reality is everybody is asking Israel to act in accordance with international law. The US itself asked Israel to act in accordance with international law, but Israel is simply defying everybody, defying its own allies, defying international law, defying the United Nations. It is conducting this war with a degree of brutality unseen, as many UN officials have said in the past. And it simply feels unaccountable. It simply feels it can get away with murder. And this is what's happening. And I think what needs to dawn on everybody is that we are, at this day and age, 2023, one country defying the whole world, violating every tenet of international law, committing war crimes, and the world is unable to do anything about it. And the victim of this war, therefore, is not just the innocent Palestinians who are being killed. The victims of this war include the credibility of international law. It includes our collective multilateral work, human values, and the faith in peace. Becky, if you go around the region and you talk to the younger generation who are waking up to those atrocities every day, Israel has created an amount of hatred that will haunt this region, that will define generations to come, and therefore it's hurting its own people as much as it is hurting everybody else in the region. This is a war that cannot be won. Israel has already suffered a strategic defeat, and that is what we need to remember. And I think it is incomprehensible that the world is allowing Israel to continue with the murder and killing of innocent people.
The US has said that Israel must do more to protect civilian life. Blinken has said that there is a gap between its intent to protect civilians and what is happening on the ground. You know, I've been around the region. I'm well aware of the feeling here. I also spent time in Israel in the first couple of weeks of this conflict, and it was very clear the sense of collective trauma that October the 7th has instilled in Israelis. The question here today is what happens now and what happens next. Did you get a sense of a change in tone, both in perhaps in private as much as in public, from the American administration? I mean, what pressure did you and other Arab ministers want to bring to bear on Washington as far as pressure on the Israelis is concerned?
Just stop this war, stop this madness, stop this aggression that is just dragging the region into the abyss of a conflict that will haunt everybody, a conflict that is facing a very serious risk of expanding. It's not just Gaza that's suffering the atrocities of this Israeli government, it's the West Bank as well. Remember, this year, even before October 7, has been the year that witnessed more Palestinians being killed than has happened in over a decade. Settlements continuing. And I think the framing of this war as well, Israeli politicians are talking as if Palestinians do not exist. The amount of dehumanization that we're seeing. When you have the Deputy Speaker of Knesset saying you should burn Gaza, when you have Israeli, again, ministers saying we should kill them, we should, they're human animals. There is a major threat out there. Obviously, we want the United States to act, to apply more pressure. We want the whole world to apply more pressure. And as one of the US senators himself said, the United States yesterday released 45,000 extra bombs to Israel. A member of the US Senate is saying, will Israel be held accountable to the US laws in terms of the usage of those weaponry? So I think we're facing a very, very difficult moment, and a moment that is going to take us deeper into the sea of death and destruction. And Israel simply feels it can do that. It feels unaccountable. So again, I think our message here collectively in the Arab Muslim delegation, and I think over the region, is this cannot go on. What's being done is criminal. It is dooming the whole region to further conflict.
Ayman Safadi, you recently spoke to one of my colleagues and said that the credibility of the region is at stake here. Everybody involved has a credibility issue at this point. Can you just explain how you believe that Jordan, the region, can restore its credibility? And to the point that we are just discussing, what does that credibility look like in a post-war Gaza and wider Palestinian file?
Thank you so much, Becky. I mean, first of all, let me just echo what Prime Minister said. There cannot be a Gaza alone approach. And the way this Israeli government is trying to frame the conversation now is that it's going to do whatever it wants to do in Gaza and the rest of us are going to come and clean up after them. That is not going to happen. How could anybody talk about what kind of structure you have in Gaza when nobody knows what kind of Gaza will be left when Israel is done with its aggression on Gaza? So that's a point that needs to be made. What's happening now is that in defiance of the whole international community, this Israeli government is conducting an aggression and expecting the whole world to come and accept the reality that it wants to impose. The reality that Israel wants to impose is again to isolate Gaza, make living conditions in it even more impossible, and then continue with the same approach it has been employing on the West Bank for decades, where it looks at the issue from a security prism only, acting on the assumption that Israel can parachute over the Palestinian people and their rights and have regional peace. This is something that we always stood against. We said the central core, the central issue in the region is the Palestinian issue, and the region will not have peace and stability unless that issue is resolved. Israel cannot have security unless Palestinians have security, period. That is something that has to be...
And nor can Jordan, by the way.
Nobody in the region will have security unless the Palestinian people have security. And I think people sometimes forget that this whole conversation should be on why do we have a conflict in the region. We have a conflict because we have an illegal occupation that has been denying Palestinian people their rights, that's been dehumanizing the Palestinian, that is refusing to show any signs of ending. And unless occupation ends, there's not going to be peace in the region. I say that to get to your question. What we want in the region is for this conflict to be resolved. The only way this conflict will be resolved is if occupation ends and Palestinian people have the legitimate rights to statehood on June 4, 1967, with occupied Jerusalem as their eternal capital. That is what we want to take the conversation to. Now, we cannot go back into a process. We've wasted 30 years of process where we saw in those 30 years nothing has happened except for Israel consolidating its occupation. And let's look at facts and figures. You have the number of settlements on the West Bank have increased by over 400% since Oslo. The amount of land confiscated, the suffocation of the Palestinian economy, the West Bank is a captive Israeli market. Palestinian GDP per capita is under $3,000. Israeli GDP per capita is over $50,000. So there has been a systematic Israeli policy to undermine the viability of the two-state solution. And the challenge is Israel, has ever Israel said what it wanted? If Israel doesn't want the two-state solution, then what does it want? I can tell you the only alternative to the two-state solution is continued conflict, because it's going to be a one-state reality. And a one-state reality is a reality of apartheid, which the Palestinians will not accept. What this Israeli government seems to have failed to understand is that it cannot break the will of the Palestinian people for freedom and statehood. It has been trying for decades to break that will, and it hasn't. And we've seen what's happening in Gaza now. So in the region, we're going to continue to work together with the international community to bring a once and for all end to this conflict. Again, no Gaza alone. What we need now is a plan with a clear end game and an implementation mechanism to get to the two-state solution where Palestinian people have their rights and have their statehood.
Thank you.